right, good morning, everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Pastor Mike. I'm sharing the message today on Stop and Smell the Roses, which is ironically something I'm not particularly good about, but hopefully there'll be something there for you and for me in this message. Some of you may remember a little while back there was a study that came out, and the study talked a little bit about how they found the correlation between people who walk quickly and their level of happiness. Any of you remember this? No? Nobody? Somebody? It happened. They basically were saying that people who they found through the study, take it or leave it, that people who tended to walk faster tended to be less happy. And of course I thought to myself, well, that's garbage, like, who spent money on a study like this? Of course, I was reacting inside because I'm that person. I find myself walking quickly from place to place. I think it's another way of saying like people who are like in a rush, in a hurry. And so I had to really grapple with this because in a sense, oh yeah, it's just some study. Somebody came out with probably just clickbait online. They're trying to get views, and it doesn't really have any meaning. But it really kind of affected me a little bit. I was like, wait a second, that can't be true. I'm in a hurry often, and I'm walking quickly. That doesn't mean I'm less happy. But one thing that I reflected on during our sabbatical was that our life slowed down a lot. And I kind of felt happier in some ways. And it made me, I thought about one time in my life when Adonia and I were living in Missouri with her parents. And up until that point, we had lived a very public, church-oriented life. Definitely not to the degree that many of you have, but for us, we spent the majority of our 20s, either working for, missions group, STF, or we were working for Blessed Teens Academy. And we were working and mentoring youth and teenagers, and it was like a live-in facility, so we lived there. And we had our first 3 children while we were doing that. And so we were busy all the time. We were raising our kids, and we were, praying with the staff or with the youth, or we would, give guidance or give morning service or give talks, give workshops, or I was, going shopping or doing all kinds of things. Ironically, not too different than my life now. And it was a very busy life, and we loved it. It was a lot of fun. And at one point, life changed. Different things happened, and we ended that part of our life, and we went and we lived with Adonia's parents for a year. And it was during that year that we decided, okay, we're just going to take some time and we're going to decide what we want to do with the next stage of our life, because we were entering our 30s and we already had 3 kids. So and our kids were young at that point, but they were getting older, and we had to think, okay, what's next for us? And for me, myself personally, I wasn't sure if I wanted to still continue to be involved in the church. There was some things that had happened, and I was very much struggling and kind of doubting a lot of things, and questioning God, questioning the church and the beliefs and everything. And I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do going forward. So that year was a really pivotal year for us to really kind of talk with each other and pray and do conditions and just kind of decide what we wanted for our lives and how we wanted to raise our kids. And in some ways, it was a very stressful year and a very stressful time, and we still had our 3 young children, so we had responsibilities and things that we needed to do. But at the same time, we had very little responsibility, and we had, my father-in-law, he ran a flower route for many years. That's how they lived. He sold flowers at bars and restaurants and such. And he stopped doing it at one point. So when we lived there, we kind of took it over. We were like, yeah, we can do that. We can wrap flowers, and we can, go from bar to bar, restaurant, and find people who want to buy flowers. It actually worked fairly well, and we didn't have a lot of expenses, so we could live that way. And so our life was very simple. We lived kind of on a farm out in the middle of nowhere where there's no cell phone reception and barely internet. And, we had 10 acres at the time, and it wasn't a lot going on. And we spent a lot of time in nature, and it was a very slow pace of life compared to the way we were living before that. And interestingly enough, I look back on that time in my life with so much gratitude. Like, that was such a valuable year for me. And in some ways, I guess I could say that maybe I wasn't as productive. I wasn't as busy. I wasn't doing as many things. But it was a time where we could slow down and really examine things, which I think is something that we as human beings don't really do that often. And we typically get kind of caught up in the things that are going on, and they keep us quite busy. There's a part of me that sometimes wishes, I wish I could go back to that way of life with little responsibility. And when children are younger, it's simpler, right? I mean, there's a lot of needs, of course, the basic needs of children. But as they get older, their needs become more complicated, right? And it's just a different experience that more we're having now as our children are teenagers, most of them. But reflecting on the study about people being more happy if they're less rushed or less, what's the word? If they walk slower, yeah. Or if they're less, what was the word I used? Anyway, less busy. Got me thinking about that time in my life and how I can't just take that time and implant it into my life right now, but it was a precious time. So it kind of makes you think, well, like, what's a good way to live your life, right? Because what ends up happening a lot is that we find ourselves wishing that life was something other than what it is. Like, if your life is very busy, you often wish, I wish my life was less busy. If your life is very quiet, many times we wish, I wish there was more going on. I wish I had more things to be a part of or to contribute to, or to things that were meaningful to me. We often kind of wish for what we don't have. And so in reflecting on something that often has moved people of a religious background in their way of life is the life of their founders, right? So like in general in Christianity, right, a lot of people will look at the life of Jesus and will think of how I can live my life as Christ as a model, right? But when we look at Jesus' life, it's hard to, in some ways, model our life after that. Because Jesus, from what we know, the little that we know of Jesus' life, was a very tough life. And his ministry was very difficult. I mean, he was essentially homeless. I mean, we have to understand that point. Jesus and his followers went from place to place, staying with different people, and they didn't have a home. They would go around and minister. And Jesus did, 40 days fasting in the desert. And he was persecuted and eventually crucified. He never married. He never had a family. He told people to join him. Drop your life. Stop doing what you're doing. Join me. Leave your parents. He told people to leave their parents, leave their family. Just join me. And even Paul, later on in the Bible, in Corinthians, he says that, it's better to just be single. Then you can just focus single-mindedly on the will of God. You don't need to get married. But he said, but if you're really lustful, then maybe it's better to be married. As if like that's the only reason to get married. Otherwise, you should be single, right? anyway, this is the reality of the history of the church, right? So that's naturally born a lot of like people who try to follow in Jesus' footsteps have become, priests and monks and have tried to live a very like serious, sacrificial life. And many were martyred, and many lived in poverty, and many lived in ways kind of reflecting that. And when we look at our own founders of our faith, our true parents, Reverend and Mrs. Moon, they have lived in a very much similar way of sacrificing their comfort, their well-being, the care that they would have preferred to give to their own children, they gave to the world, they give to the members. Received a lot of persecution. Our true father went to prison 6 times, not of his own fault. And you can find many examples where he would say things like, just leave everything behind. Just sacrifice yourself wholeheartedly for God, for the providence. That's what we should do. So sometimes we find it difficult to reconcile how should I live my life? How should I live my best life with, the people that we look up to and admire and respect so much? Because I think in some ways we know we can't live like that. And we're not probably called to live like that, most of us. But how do we find like a balance? How do we find a middle ground? How do we find something that works for us, where we find that, fulfillment and happiness? I think that we all recognize already that life is not just one stretch of the same thing from beginning to end. We go through phases, we go through seasons, we go through ups and downs. And in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, it talks about this. It says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, granted, this is very Old Testament, but it makes some good points. I was thinking about this point. It says a time to search and a time to quit searching. When we were in that year, I did a lot of searching. I wanted to find out everything. I wanted to find all the answers. And I read lots of books on near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, and I interviewed lots of church members, and I read a lot of books by people both who were in the church, who had left the church, or also people who were third party, who weren't a part of the church at any point in their life, but they had, for one reason or another, written a book about their experience with church members or with the faith. And I spent a lot of time, I dug into everything I could dig into. And that was it was very challenging for me, but it was a lot of fun. I spent so much time. And there's a part of me that kind of wonders, where did that passion go? Like, these days, I have a hard time just picking up a book. I don't know if I got burnt out at that time or whatever. I have picked up books since then. But for some reason, that desire that I had to search for the truth was at that time in my life. I needed it. It was like so urgent for me. It was so important for me at that time. But I don't feel that way anymore. But there's a part of me that kind of wishes that I kind of miss that feeling of just the drive to find answers. But there's a time for that. And I think that was kind of what I came away from this, when I was thinking about this topic. This is kind of what I came away with. And that there's a time for both. in our lives. There's a time for, focusing on, I don't know what you call it, being busy, being productive, being purposeful, having something that really inspires us, and we're willing to just put that time in, put everything else aside. But then there's a time for things to slow down. There's a time to smell the roses, stop and smell the roses. I would go further to say that not only is there a time and a place for both in our lives, but we actually need to learn to embrace both. Because like I said before, we often live our life wishing that things were different. But learning, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad to want more in life or to want something different in life. I think that's a God-given nature as well. It might actually be God speaking to you, I don't know. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think that there's also value in being able to appreciate what we do, where we're at in life right now, what we do have. Because we can easily just get caught up in life wishing that things were different, but then they don't change, and then that time will have passed. And we'll have missed that opportunity. This is a quote from our founder, Reverend Moon. He said, "You should set aside some time to experience joy with your mind. To others, it may seem as if you are all alone, but during that time, you would become friends with your mind, sit with your mind at some tranquil place and meditate. Then you will enter a state of deep prayerfulness. You will thus enter a world unknown to anyone else but you. You need such experiences." I think this is an interesting concept, becoming friends to your mind. But when I've actually had people tell me that they don't actually like to sit and listen to themselves. I don't know if you can relate to that, but I can relate to it. There are times where I don't like listening to my own thoughts. Like, they can be very stressful sometimes, or born of insecurity. And sometimes just being able to sit with your own thoughts can be like something to explore, like a challenge. Anyway, I thought that was a very interesting point. But that takes time, and it takes peace. And in our busy life, how often do we actually take time to stop and listen to my own thoughts? What is it that I really want? Where am I going? All these kind of things. This is another quote. He said, you might look at nature and say, "Oh, I don't need the 4 seasons. I only need spring. I hate summer, autumn, and winter." But if you were to ask God, he would answer, "I love all 4 seasons. Hence, you need to learn to love summer, autumn, and winter. And even though you may have hated them to begin with, when the winter snow comes, God looks upon the world covered in white and derives pleasure from it. Therefore, you should say, 'Oh, I love it too. This is the way it should be.'" And then another one. Within the life of any individual, there is a difference between his childhood, youth, middle age, and old age. Not only in human life is this true, but also in nature. We see 4 seasons coming, one right after the other. Can you insist on wearing winter clothes when summer comes? No, you need to change your clothes to suit the season. This is exactly how it happens in our lives. Those who belong to the summer of life, which is the prime of youth, want to have eternal youth. But that is not possible. It's natural that there must be a change. But are you not inclined to insist on remaining the same age? You are afraid that by changing, you will somehow decline. You know from experience that you don't always go up. Every day your mood has ups and downs. You may think that you want to have no downs at all in your life, but that cannot be. So I was talking with Adonia about this last night, and when we were gone for 2 months, it really forced me to really slow down my pace and to really kind of examine what I want to be doing with my time. And so since coming back, we still have the responsibilities of pastoring the church, and we still have 4 kids, and we have the school, Adonia's running. But I have really taken a step back, and I've really made an intentional effort to find the things that I feel really passionate about and that I enjoy doing. And so I asked Adonia about it last night. Oh, how do you is it working? So, and to my I was happy to hear that she was like, yeah, you seem much more peaceful and happier to doing the things that you're doing. So I have decided that there was merit to that study after all. I don't know how much money they spent, how many people, how much greater effect it had on the world, but it made an impact on me. I'm grateful they did it, because it definitely had me thinking that I don't need to be busy all the time. I don't need to be rushed. I can still be effective, and I can still be purposeful in doing the things that I'm doing, and joyful in doing the things that I'm doing, and appreciate the moment and smell the roses that are there in front of me. So I hope that this perspective maybe can give you some appreciation for the season of life that you may be in right now. Please join me in prayer. Dearest Heavenly Parent, thank you so much for this gathering of your children and brothers and sisters, and we really pray, hope, Heavenly Parent, for your presence and guidance in our lives. Heavenly Parent, we go through many different ups and downs and seasons, and we know that you see those things, Heavenly Parent, and we know that you are encouraging us to grow and encouraging us to be better, and at the same time also really hoping, Heavenly Parent, that we can appreciate and value the moment and the seasons that we are in our life right now, because there's something good in them as well. There's something to be learned, there's something to be grateful for in those seasons, Heavenly Parent, and life will never always be the same. And I just pray, Heavenly Parent, that each and every one of us can find greater gratitude in whatever season of life we happen to be in right now, in whatever challenges, in whatever victories, in whatever it is that we're dealing with, Heavenly Parent, that we can find your perspective, that we can find your heart and your spirit in those things, Heavenly Parent. And we really do pray for your presence and guidance in our life, because we don't want to be going about this life just by ourselves, just for ourselves, Heavenly Parent. And I thank you. I thank you for this time that we could be together. I pray that you could have spoken to our hearts and our souls this morning, and we just want to offer and lift all these things up to you and offer this prayer on behalf of all of our names as Blessed Central families. Amen and adieu. Thank you.